the relationship you're talking about here in the public markets, there's and at times thousands of people who hold this stuff. And could be for companies, or even the MTA was saying that, ridership of the subway is down 90%, and they're worried that they don't have the revenue to pay their bonds and things like that. So that's a very different type of relationship, and also kind of lender than if you look in the private markets. In the private markets, is it safe to say that in almost all of these relationships, you're talking about one single borrower being a company or corporation, and then there's just one lender per relationship? And maybe a company has multiple lenders, but really it's kind of a one-to-one. You're not seeing any sort of like, hey, I took money from an SPV and then I've got to deal with all the shareholders on the other side of the SPV.
It depends. And so it's a whole spectrum. I mean, in the simplest sense, there might be a borrower and there's a lender, and there's only one lender in the whole deal, and the borrower has a direct relationship. And if the borrower has a really good relationship with that lender, they may say, look, we've been working together for 10 to 15 years. You don't want to blow up. I don't want to blow up. If you force me to do all the things that are in the covenant packages of this loan, I'm going to default. And, if you're a fund, you don't want your borrowers to default. You kind of look dumb. Or it might be a lender who, that's the whole reason they do this. They're hoping you default, because if you default, they get to own equity in your business. And so knowing who your lender is and what your lender's sort of goal was is pretty important. And then next is also understand the situation your lender is in. So if your lender is exposed to a ton of stuff that's like sort of hitting the fan, that's not so good, because they might be acting in a reactionary way. Or if stuff's hitting the fan, you may be the least of their problems and they just don't want one more default. It's really hard to kind of figure that out. The other thing is your lender levered, right? So if your lender gave you money and they gave you $100 million, but only 20 million of it was theirs, and they have a bank who gave them 80 million, in many ways, leverage is not good because it magnifies losses. Another reason leverage isn't good is you're not the boss of yourself. Like, usually when we do a deal, we're senior lenders. Part of the reason we do that is because, we don't want to take more risk than we need to take. And the other part is, like, let's imagine I have a portfolio company that has an issue. I almost always know more about what's going on with that company than some bank who might be lending to me, where they got like my investment committee memo and my data room and all this stuff, but they don't know the actual situation on the ground. They're not on the phone with the company every day. And not having leverage gives you like sort of the ability to sort of do what you need to do to make the right decision, rather than doing what you need to do within the confines of rules that were set pre-COVID or pre a circumstance you could have never expected before. There's another situation where you might have multiple lenders, and those lenders are all acting differently. And trying to figure out how to navigate what makes sense for one lender versus another. One of the things that's often in terms where if you have multiple lenders is all lenders need to be treated pari passu, or get most favored nation. What you don't want to be is a lender to a company where the other lenders are getting treated more fairly. That might be a situation where you have one lender who's being a total jerk, your other two lenders or four lenders or even 5, 10, whatever, are being great. And you have to figure out how to navigate all those relationships so that one lender doesn't blow up everything else. But then on the other hand, you might be totally thrilled that you've diversified your capital base, which is something that you often hear. And the last part is understanding, like, if you're private equity owned, Blackstone is sort of a big deal. If they go tell their lender, hey, I believe that if you give me a little bit of flexibility here, I'm going to work this out. One, they're a really important client to the lender, and the lender doesn't want to screw that up. Two, they have a lot of credibility because they've been through this before. If you're like a rinky-dink private equity firm that, doesn't have that same sort of relationship with large banks, you can't have those same conversations. So it's really, really hard to say this is how a lender-borrower relationship works, because there's so many other factors involved.
What can people do right now to ruin their relationship, right? Or reputation? So like we hear all the time, hey, you could build your reputation over years and years and years. And you can be the greatest person in the world in the bull markets. When the bear market hits, it's really easy to kind of blow up that reputation that you've built by just doing kind of shitty things. From your perspective, like what are the things that are most likely for somebody to do that then leads to kind of the hurt on the reputation side? Is it just not following through with what they're supposed to do, or something more complex?
So, so usually when something goes wrong, it's the borrower's fault, right? They didn't do something they were supposed to do. In this case, like a virus occurred, everyone got sick, so everyone had to stay home, and so people stopped spending money, and like it's sort of not your fault anymore. And one reaction might be to go to all your lenders and say everything's fine. Everything's not fine. Like, I've left my apartment 4 times this week. Like, fuck you if you think everything's fine. And you know, one way to ruin your reputation or confidence from your lender is to be ignorant. Or, you know, one temptation that a lot of founders and entrepreneurs have is to show confidence, because if you don't show confidence in the market, people assume things are worse than they are. I don't think this is the time to do that. I think this is the time to say, here's our plan and here's our base case. Here's how we think things are going to affect us. In a good scenario, it doesn't affect us or affects us less than we thought. In a base case, it affects us, and here's what would happen. In a bear case, this is how bad it can get. I've found in the conversations I'm having with our portfolio, the more worried the founder is, the less worried I am. The less worried the founder is, the more worried I am, because it makes me think that someone has to worry and it's not them. The second thing is hiding information. You know, one temptation is to say, oh my God, you know, I'm lending money to, because often we're working with companies that are lending money to other companies. And they may have a loan that's not performing. One thing they may want to do is refinance that loan and say, well, you know, this is a borrower that we've worked with for a long time. You know, they're struggling and they already were struggling. And this is a moment that makes it even harder. Let's lend to them again. Let's put a little bit more money out because it'll help them get through this time. You know, in rare cases, that's the right thing to do. But I would say, look, like, you normally, if you're going to get yelled at for making a bad loan, this is the time that you're not going to get yelled at. Just like cut it off. And even if it was COVID related, people understand. If it wasn't COVID related, people are going to still think it was COVID related and give you the benefit of the doubt. So it's a really good moment to kind of cut things out from the book, or make, if you saw something trending in a bad way, make this the quarter that you write it off. But the way that you can really screw this up is lying, pretending like you're more optimistic than you are, committing fraud, or doing things that are going to put your lender or your investor in a bad position with their investors, because those are things that are sort of unforgivable.